Great. Well, thanks so much. And thanks everyone for making it wherever you are in the world, if you're in Jacksonville or elsewhere. I'm Sharath Srinivasan. I'm a co-founder of Katikati. And I'll tell you a little bit more about Katikati in a second. And really glad to have the chance to tell you what we're doing, what we're up to, and hopefully get a bunch of feedback. So thanks again for your time. If you hold on one sec, I was just getting started. I'm going to close the door. I'll be back in a sec. Thank you. Great. So we've got a couple of people still coming in. What we're going to do is not so much a sort of traditional pitch, but tell you something about the ethos and purpose of the organization and the platform and the social venture that we've created, what we're trying to do with it, and hopefully give you a sense of how it works and what it feels like and why we've made some design decisions that really are relevant to the way that we think about feedback and accountability, and see what you think. So I'm just going to share my screen and get some slides up for this. Great. Cool. Okay, so hopefully you can all see my screen. So what we're about with Katikati is trying to build communication technology that has different values and ethics embedded in the design of the technology itself. So rather than, in a sense, resorting to available technologies that allow us to do X and Y, but were maybe built for a different purpose, what happens when we build them from the bottom up with the sorts of values that we prioritize front and center. So we're very much about trying to enable organizations to have conversations with the people that matter to them, that enable them to strengthen the relationships they have with their counterparts. So a little bit more about the organization itself and what we are about. So as I said, we're about the way that organizations interact and converse with their counterparts being at the heart of the relationships that they care about. And so Katikati is about enabling two-way digital conversations that allow for organizations to shape those conversations in ways that make most sense to them. We're especially interested in how organizations maintain a human-to-human connection, even when they're trying to converse with large numbers of people one-to-one at scale. So we built this platform that enables an organization to converse with individuals, and those individuals will be on their phones. Usually they might be on a web chat, but communicating over different channels that make sense to them. So we've done a lot of work, mostly in sub-Saharan Africa, with nonprofit organizations working with SMS and integrating, on the one hand, SMS on the side of the counterpart, but on the organization side, a web interface that allows them to handle communications in a really thoughtful manner. But it also might be instant messaging like Telegram, web chat, as I said, or other channels. And along the way, a couple of things that we care about is the way that if you can put really good user-centered design into the interfaces that organizations use in these communications, handling larger numbers of these conversations is more possible and still efficient. And human conversations that are more unstructured and open allow people to speak as they would wish, rather than resort to more structured, more automated conversations. We've also built in machine assistance that supports humans both in scaling up the capacity for handling conversations, but also in interpreting and understanding these conversations. So supporting analytical insights into the conversations and linking that often to workflows or responsive action. So in this way, we think that the communication technology can sort of embed itself in the organization's relationships with the people it cares about. Could be staff, could be volunteers, could be people that they're providing services to, and embed that communication in a stronger way that thickens and strengthens the relationship rather than fragments that. So I'll be talking a little bit more about this, but if you think you might ask, why Katikati? Why did we think that it was important to develop something like this? I guess one thing we noticed is that for organizations, there are opportunities to have conversations with individuals that are personal but few in a sense. So could be one-to-one conversations in person or over a telephone call. And those conversations obviously are really rich, they're really deep, but they don't scale. It's also hard to have interpretive insight across many of these because they're often very individually led. And finally, where time and distance is an issue, it means that scale in that sense is also difficult, which is to say when there are things like a pandemic and constraints on movement, these sorts of approaches don't always work. By contrast, a lot of technologies that we have available to us to get over this challenge of scale and challenge of time and space are often ones that reduce our conversations and interactions to very fixed, structured modes of communication. So surveys, automated messages, chatbots, etc., instant interactive voice response. So you have in those situations the ability to often scale up communications, but sometimes they're just one way, like surveys or interactive voice response, where there's not really a listening person on the other end. Or they are two-way but automated in ways that people often don't find they can trust. So chatbots being a classic example, especially around sensitive communications. So where the communications really matter in terms of trust and the quality of the relationship and the ability to listen, a lot of these technologies that enable larger volumes of communication are often compromised in other ways. So we were interested in how can we build communication technology which protects trusted human-to-human conversations and enhances accountability for relationships with counterparts. And we think that well-designed communication technology can actually really support that. Obviously, it a lot depends on organizations and their culture and people as well. But well-designed communication technologies can support that in a really strong way. So Katikati then is, and there's our animation. Katikati is like an interface for conversations. So what you're looking at is in one of the Katikati interfaces here that was used in a COVID response program with the Malawi Red Cross. And it's an interface that is pretty basic and simple, but designed in a really thoughtful manner. On the left-hand side, you have a bunch of lists of conversations. In this case, they're de-identified. So we don't have phone numbers listed there. They're de-identified before they come to the interface. In the center, what you can see is the conversation itself. And what you'll notice is that there are little things that we've built into this, for example, a two-language level so that the translations can occur either automated or manual, and a bunch of things like tags. So the ability to tag a message with a particular interpretation. And that becomes really valuable because that tagging enables, as you can see on the left-hand side and the bottom, filtering. So you can filter by different tags. So organizations can tag messages and then come back to them and look for them in particular ways. It might be on demographics or particular themes that have come up in conversations. And on the right-hand side, there are different things that they can do with these conversations, like have pre-populated standard messages to make it easier and quicker to send out standard approved messages that might have, for example, vetted health content that needs to be controlled, and also pull up the tags that they can use to tag messages and conversations as well. So in a way, it's like, what you can imagine, like WhatsApp for desktop, you have an interface that you can handle conversations, but many channels can connect into it. And more importantly, the interpretive function is built in, and that's part of what you can do. You can both communicate and interpret in the same space. And because you can interpret in this space, you can connect the interpretation to actions. And that becomes quite important in some of the work that we've been supporting for different organizations so far. So that's the interface and a bit of a sense of what it's all about. From the interface around conversations, which is that sort of converse interface we were looking at on the left-hand side here, it immediately can because of the tagging function, the way we use tags, it can immediately populate real-time analytics, so dashboards. Now those dashboards and can be used for thematic tracking of the different content that's coming up in conversations. That could be a static or it could be over time tracking of whether the conversations are changing in terms of what people are talking about when they raise rumors about COVID in the context of Malawi here, or it could be the tracking of responsiveness, so action-oriented tracking. So have we responded to these conversations in the last 24 hours, etc. So we're trying to link that just to the ability in the converse space to track this data. So some of that tracking is automatic and some of it's based on the organization's priorities itself. And then, yes, as I was saying, the ability to track sensitivity. So we found often with organizations, they wanted to escalate certain conversations they're having that are highly sensitive or urgent, and make sure they're responding to those really, really quickly. So the conversation on the right-hand side, is marked as an escalate, this means that it's tracked, that tag of escalate is tracked in certain ways on the dashboard. So how quickly have we responded to escalate conversations, how many are waiting response. So you get a kind of the initial elements of what will be a case management system, but just driven from the conversational platform itself, rather than in a separate space. What we wanted to do now is actually just do a bit of a live demo. So slightly risky, and this is always fun, but we wanted to do a bit of a live demo where we give you a chance to interact and experience what Katikati is a bit like. So on the screen, you'll see a QR code that you can scan, or a link hopefully in the chat that is for the same, whoops, sorry. Where have I gone? There we go. A link in the chat, hopefully, which Arnav, my colleague, will have just posted in then. And what it'll take you to is a sort of mock phone interface. And if you're on a phone, it'll come up looking like a phone shape in itself. And if you're not on a phone, it'll come up just on a web page, and it'll ask you just to enter a name, and you can enter any username for yourself there, and then invite you to sort of say a message, a hello message with me. And what I'm going to do now is navigate out of the slides here to the interface itself, so that we can have a look at how things work. So bear with me. Oops, sorry, that was wrong. Right. So hopefully you can see, I'm just logging into Katikati here. If anyone, if there's any issues there, just let me know. So I'm going to sign in, and I'm signing in. So Katikati here is being linked to a Gmail Firebase, a Google Firebase. So that's allowing me to sign in. Hopefully I'm signing in. And as I said, where we started just before was we were on the conversation space. So here we are. There's a couple of conversations happening. Someone's saying hello to me, someone's saying greetings. So, the first thing that I might usually be doing is going into a conversation and wanting to handle it as it's coming in. Now, one of the things that we developed is this, and it's a little example of what we think is important. It's what we call turn line. So if you can imagine, usually automated surveys or automated responses have a pretty crude triaging. So a message comes in. If a message comes in, we send the next question, or we send the next message. And what this is trying to do is it's trying to make it more deliberate when humans get engaged in these processes. So if I just say, someone said hi there, and I'm going to type a message, which I can type a manual message here and say, hey, great. To type today, sorry about that. And I've sent this message, and that's just a manual message. So that's the user in the organization sending a manual message. But then now I have the opportunity in my short survey here to send a standard message. So this message says, can I ask, does your organization use digital platforms for two-way feedback loops with its counterparts? So that message has just quickly been sent because I've already preloaded it as a standard message. So I'm going to say hello to a few more people. And I'm also going to send the standard message. And I'm going to do that for a few people. So thanks everyone for being in touch. And as you can tell, what I'm doing is just quickly sending these messages, because this is preloaded in the way that I've been doing things. And what we think is that often this means that you can combine the manual message, which allows you to be personalized and have the right type of communication based on what someone's just said. So someone just thanked me, so I might start by saying hi, thanks, but then I might then put the automatic message. And then, so I've got a quick answer from our friend here, who's been de-identified, as you can tell, and they said no, right? So what I want to do now is that I'm going to tag this message. I'm highlighting this message here, and I tag it, which no, don't have two-way feedback. That's a tag that I've given to this message. I'm going to see if there's another person who says, oh, this is cool. Also, yes. So we see their second question is, their second message is a yes. And I'm going to tag that with yes. And so what this is doing is you'll see that there's a thing on the right-hand side that there was a box called hello. And I sent the standard message and then I put the tag and it said yes. And what it means is that I've interpreted that message and I've said yes, which is an active conscious interpretation by the organization that understands that was an answer to the message. And as soon as I did that, it said that this section of that survey was finished, and it opened up a new set of standard messages, which says, good to hear, what challenges have you faced? So I can now send this message. And the point here is that usually a survey would just automate the response, but we don't know sometimes what kinds of messages will be coming in. And we might not want to send the automated response. So for example, this person says we sometimes do, and I might be interested to look at that. I'll say thanks. That's interesting. Sometimes. I'm sending this message here, and then I'm going to another one here and saying hi there. And this one is still in the start of the survey, so I'm sending the start survey message as a start message. Hello. There's quite a few here, which is quite exciting. I might not get to all of you, so don't worry if I don't. So quite a few people. And here we go, no, only phone calls, not via SMS or other. So that's another no. And that's for this message here. So I'm going to mark, oops, I got that wrong. So I can delete that tag and then put no. And I might just go straight to thank you then for this, because let me see. Let me come back to that. Okay, so here I've got a conversation where someone said, can I ask, does the organization, I asked them about whether they use these feedback loops. They said, yes, sort of. And I might just say, why do you say sort of? So I might instead not want to immediately tag this message. I might want to ask a question further. And the point is that I can use a conversational approach, which still stays within the structure of my survey, but allows me to sort of spot things that are a bit surprising. And here they've said, we used to, but we had to stop because we kept facing annoying technical issues. So this is quite interesting. So I go back I might now say, okay, they answered the first question, yes. So I have an answer to that, and now I have challenges, and I don't need to ask the question about what challenges you face. I could ask it differently, but I already have a challenge, which is technical issues. So I'm going to tag that as technical issues. So in that sense, I didn't have to go through the question of asking the challenges, and I could just thank that person at this point. So all of this is going on. I've got another interesting one about no only phone calls, not via SMS either. So I'm going to leave that and just say thanks. A bunch of conversations, and some of them have gone in the order that one might expect, and some of them haven't. And I think that's kind of one of the things that we would notice. So for example, I might decide that I want to look at a message like this, says they don't have two-way feedback, and I might say, I want to create a tag that says users phone only, and that becomes a particular tag that I'm interested in. So what happens is on the interface, there's a message here, but I've actually created a new tag. And all these tags that we're creating are in this configuration place called the tag configurator. And that's where we sort of organize these tags. So that was a new tag that I created, and it'll appear here, which is this user's phone only. And there you see the example of that message. So in the space where we create tags, there's those messages are directly linked to the interpretations we're making. And it means that I can quickly shortcut link back to that message, that conversation only. So if I click that, what happens is it goes back to the converse space and it pre-filters. It shows conversations only with that tag, because that's what I just selected from the tag space. So you can see that the tagging space, the space of interpretation, is also a place of creating filters and being able to sort of navigate the conversations as well. Now, if I just get rid of that, I go back to all of the different conversations. And here I have a really interesting conversation. I was like, hi, great question. Origins. Kenya, Swahili, and so I'm going to say send that message. But actually, what I also want to say to you all is that what we mean is that, like, creating communication technology that is in between organizations and the people that matter to them, and enables them to do powerful new things as a result of that. So I've given you a bunch of just quick sort of interaction on the Katikati interface. All the while I was doing this, I'm in a conversation. I can go to my Explorer page, where I'm seeing sort of real-time analytics on the conversations. So here we have, do they use two-way feedback loops? We've got some of the no's, and you can see that it gives us a count of the data, but it also gives us some of the answers that have come in, and allows us to look at different issues that way. So I'm going to go back now to the conversations. And then I see this conversation that's come in, and it says, help, I can't find my room at this conference. I'm going to miss the session. Can you help? Now, I might say, oh my gosh, that is an escalate. So it's an escalate, and I go to my operations tags, and I know that for these sorts of concerns, they're sort of out of my comfort zone, and I usually get one of the other members of the team to look at it. So I tag the message and I press escalate. And at this point, escalates are being handled by my colleague Arnav. Now, so I've tagged this as escalate. Now, what you can see on the left-hand side is that a little A has come up, and that is Arnav. So if I'm in an organization, I want to know where my colleagues are handling different conversations. We might be on this interface together. We can track who's where and click on them, and I could be somewhere else. And if I click on Arnav, I go to the conversation where he's at. So Arnav is now the person who handles escalates in our organization. So that escalate has appeared. And if we go to the Explorer, that's another place where we can see that there's an escalate conversation a tracker in terms of when conversations have come in. So Arnav's in that space, and he has answered this, and he said, sorry to hear this. Let me find the agenda for you. Does this address your concern? So he's gone and helped this person out in terms of where they need to go into the Feedback Labs conference and find the right session. Now the person responds and says, yes, that this isn't that they got their help. And so he has the ability then to de-escalate this. So he tags it as a de-escalate. And so what that means is that in the Explorer space, where we're tracking this kind of stuff, there's no conversations awaiting response, because the conversation that came in has been resolved. So at the bottom, it says total number of resolved escalated issues. And it took him 3 minutes to respond, or averages 3 minutes to respond. The point being that you can actually then create operational workflows and referrals through this space that allow us to manage workflows, etc. And we're building a lot more sort of things where it links back to actual workflows that organizations care about, and the ability to tag conversations links to these sorts of workflows. So with that, and I'd love to keep going, and I'm really slow at typing and talking at the same time. And I will say a quick few thanks to some friends here who have been very kind with their messages, and say goodbye from the Katikati space. So thanks to all of you for chatting with us with the demo a bit. I can bring this back up in a second when we're talking, but happy to sort of close on the demo bit there and just say a couple of more things, if that's okay, about how we work. I just have to bring up my slides. Just 1 second. Somehow managed not to go to the slides. There we go. It's always fun when you are on screen share with the full screen. I can't get the Zoom to find the screen, so give me a second and I will. There we are, great. So back to those slides that I was just on before, and hopefully you can all see them, and I'll just whiz through to where we got to. So one of the things that we're interested in is, okay, what you just saw, it was hard for me to handle both at the same time, but basically that's a human-led conversation, things that are happening that we might anticipate in a structured sort of survey or encounter. But if people say something different or it's urgent, we've got human attentiveness and we can handle that in the conversation space. So we don't have to resort to automated messaging. Of course, the challenge with this is scale, and how do we think about scale? So one of the things we've noticed is a lot of that scale can come from just getting the user interface right and building in trackers and little things that help a dashboard of handling human-to-human conversations in an interface like this. So we think actually you can achieve a lot of scale. We've seen organizations with a couple of staff handle many hundreds or thousands of conversations at any one point in time, just because of the filtering and tagging and organizing functions that are in the user interface. But the other thing that we've built in, and this is especially important with larger volumes of communications, is sort of machine assistance built into the capabilities of the platform based on the data infrastructure. And this is super interesting because what we're doing with the machine assistance at Katikati is we're not doing automated bot-based decision-making. What we're suggesting is that the machine can suggest tags to the human, just like we were doing the tagging in the conversation before. And here we have a conversation where I've said, hi from Katikati, how are things? And someone said, doing well, it's sunny today. And so the machine says, oh, well, that's a message about the weather. And so it suggests a tag. And then you can see a little robot next to the tag that's suggested there. And then the human can confirm the interpretation by clicking the tick. And that confirms that this is the right interpretation, which itself is like a training moment for the machine itself. But as a result of the human confirming that tag, the machine can then suggest a response and say, well, look, if that's the right tag, you might want to send a message saying, thanks, tell us about the weather. And it makes it much easier for a human to just say, oh, all they have to do is confirm that that's the right message to send. So there's still a human moment in all of this. There's still human decision-making, but it's just much faster and much quicker. And so it's the human is largely confirming what the machine is suggesting. And obviously, the more that happens, the more confident we can have in the machine suggestions, to the point where we might explicitly decide that something is particularly low risk and it warrants a further automation. But we're not rushing to automation straight away because we want to protect that trusted conversation between individuals. So some of the uses of Katikati so far, just really quickly, as I've mentioned before, with the Malawi Red Cross, we've been doing work helping them communicate with their many thousands of volunteers across the country, using this as a platform and free SMS for volunteers to communicate, ask questions, express concerns about COVID response or rumors, etc., at community level, get support from the organization, raise sensitive issues if they want to, and handle all of that in a communication space that allows for interpretation and analysis over time. We're working with a Kenya-based youth-focused media organization and social change organization, Shujaz, really wonderful organization we've worked with for many years. And they've got a huge followership, a fan base, young people who love their comics and their other media content. And they've been communicating with them over SMS for a long time, but more just fans sending in SMS to free numbers and getting automated responses and some ad hoc communications. But handling the scale of that's been difficult. Interpreting the richness of those conversations over time has been difficult, and also handling the urgent concerns and crises that often come up. So we've been, Katikati has been supporting them to handle this kind of interactions in quite a large project where they receive many thousands of messages a day. And the last one is around program accountability. So far that has taken the form of thinking about how to provide support for cash transfer programs to ensure that people receive their cash in particular humanitarian contexts, and that's being useful for particular purposes, etc. And follow up to understand the impact of those programs and to get people's feedback and insights more connected to the programming design and development over time. So that's just another example. And in terms of how we're thinking about this, so this was supposed to be a pitch session, but it's been mostly about content. I mean, what kind of model makes sense? We're a social business, in effect, trying to build out this platform and its use, focusing on working with other organizations. And what we've found is that in some contexts, it's really heavy going just to get one of these platforms up and running. Mobile network operators, government regulations, etc., can really slow down a platform like this being useful. In other contexts, it's really quick and easy to just connect it to a web chat or to an easy purchasable phone number, especially in like global north countries. It's quite quick to link this up to some existing channels. And also you get organizations with a limited ability to pay but strong social commitment in the global south. And so how do we get this right? So we've broadly been looking at doing this through straight up Katikati as a kind of software as a service for easy operational environments. You know, you can pretty much use it as and get going yourself, and a model that's much quicker and cheaper to deploy for us. One that's based on a consulting model where we start with an initial intensive consulting with an organization to get them up to speed, get them trained up, support their programmatic uses, get the operational setup done work, and then transition them to just using it as a platform independently. And then more thick co-design partnerships where we're really trying to co-design solutions for socio-technical problems and program applications with the organizations we're working with. So I think I'll stop there and open up the floor for questions and comments. I think there's a bunch of stuff in the chat. I haven't looked at the chat yet, so maybe we can start there. So there's a question already from Rebecca, so I'm going to ask Rebecca to jump in and then I'll have a look at the chat as we go.
Yeah, thank you so much. This has been great to see. I'm curious to learn from your use cases transitioning from having a phone center to using SMS. Like, I also work for an organization in Malawi. I'm curious, what have you learned from the populations you're serving? Like, what's the benefit to shifting, and what have you seen in terms of uptake if people are more likely to pick up a phone and call a call center or to use SMS? What are some of the things you've considered there?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, so I think in a lot of cases, this is not necessarily an either or either. So in the Malawi context, for example, the Malawi Red Cross also has a call sort of center function as well with a help desk that uses calls. And I think they were getting a limited number of calls, largely driven by demand. So the people, the volunteers, seeing a number, knowing that they can call it, but they were getting calls in the form of 1 or 2 or 3 a day. What SMS allowed, two-way SMS allows, is that yes, sometimes it's coming because people know the numbers there and they're SMSing in, but at other times, what the Malawi help desk team was able to do was send out a message to everyone's, greet them for the week and say, do you have any questions, or greet them and ask them, can you tell us about any interesting views in the community about COVID or vaccines at the moment? So it really allowed for an ability to create an ongoing conversation rather than just a responsive call desk. So that's one thing. And then obviously the other thing is that it just allows for asynchronous communication by a larger team. So people who are SMSing into the help desk on Katikati, those messages are coming in at different times. They can handled by the team at different times of the day, and by a group of them. And so it just enables a bit more scaling and ability to handle larger volumes, which for a small, where a call center is quite small, that can be a bit more challenging. But obviously call centers are quite important because of literacy for other reasons, and sometimes they're more preferred. The other thing we found is that sometimes some volunteers preferred the anonymity that was provided by an SMS channel to be able to raise concerns or issues. So that was something that came up, and it's come up in other cases as well, not just in Malawi. So a couple of reasons why I think there are strengths and weaknesses. But I think one thing that we feel is really worth thinking about is that for some reason, SMS and a lot of these communications have become inherently associated with either chatbots or with SMS surveys and bulk messaging. And so there's a sort of kind of deterioration of the quality of what that channel could be. And once that is corrected, and trust is built around a channel like this, and the personalization and active listening is a feature, we find that it's actually a really valuable channel. And this has been in other contexts in the world as well, where SMS communication, because of the neatness and clarity of the channel, is considered really valuable for certain contexts. But yeah, and I think it does vary though so much depending on the program used in the context. Great. So I think Arnav's answering a lot of questions in the channel, which is great. And Arnav, you had your hand up, but you've put it down, so I might have said what you were going to say. I feel like Clara, do you want to, I don't know if you want to jump in on audio, but you've got a couple of questions. I think Arnav's addressed them. And here's another point, okay. Yeah, Clara saying at the end, we struggle to ensure that valuable face-to-face feedback is documented and integrated into our overall FCRM. That's we miss it on trends and info from direct communication. Does Katikati help with that? So, I mean, it's a really interesting question. So I think insofar as Katikati's analytics are based on tagging communication. So I think what we love about what we're trying to do with Katikati is this idea that your communication space works well as a communication space, but it's also a space of interpretation and analysis, and that's really primarily done by the tagging. And that tagging is useful for analysis and for documentation and for looking at trends, but that tagging is also action-oriented tagging. So if I tag something as escalate, it also can relate to an action, which is that, so for example, in some projects, we use it as a triage. If someone tags something as sensitive, that conversation can now only be seen by someone with a certain credential, and they can only then access those conversations. So this ability to tag in situ in the conversation is linked to a bunch of operational things that are valuable to an organization, but also analytical. So what are the different rumors coming up in terms of COVID vaccines, for example? And so, yes, insofar as the data goes into a data infrastructure and you see it in the visualizations and the Explorer, that can also be connected, exported, or connected to other databases that might be important for collecting trend analysis, etc. So with the Red Cross, for example, we've been working with Malawi Red Cross and Cote d'Ivoire Red Cross as well, and probably some others in the near future. But we've also been working with the Regional Africa Community Engagement and Accountability team, and they've been aggregating feedback from across the continent around COVID rumors and misinformation. And so part of it's coming from Katikati, and we've been showing them how to integrate this into their more aggregate analytics on trends, etc. So in that case, integrating with a Power BI dashboard that they've got and things like that. Jeff, you're off mute. Do you want to jump in? Maybe not. So yeah, great questions, Clara. Thanks so much. Yeah, no, the tagging is pretty exciting, and I think it's somehow, I mean, one of the things that, if no one else wants to jump in with a question, this came from a bit of a research background and interest in, and the first nonprofit startup I was involved with, which came out of research, was an organization called Africa's Voices Foundation, and we were using interactive radio to reach audiences in local languages and hear their views and feed that to decision makers. And we've developed a mixed methodology around that. And so a lot of the thinking that started with Africa's Voices was also around how we enable the people who understand the language and the context the most, so the research assistants, etc., to be able to do the interpretation. So rather than taking data out of this interface, putting it in that spreadsheet, using this coding frame, taking it further and further into a kind of obscure research hole, how do we get the people who are closest to this data to use easy user interfaces to tag the data? So one of the interfaces we haven't shown you here today is an interface where all the messages come up and the tagging can be just done really quickly and efficiently across a large volume of messages. And we've been using that in a project in Ghana right now. But the point is that I think to build the user interfaces so that it's really easy for people who know the context and the language best to be able to do the tagging. So the in-situ tagging in the conversation space in Katikati allows people who are handling the conversations. In the case of Shujaz, it's these interns who work with a supervisor who handle the youth conversations, and they're young themselves, and making a really easy interface for them to look at the messages that are often in Sheng, so they're in a slang language, and then they can use the tagging really easily, and they become researchers in effect, trained up on how to use the coding frame, etc. And lots of work can then be done to think about how can tagging help the organization get insights into what it's looking for, etc. Great. Yeah, love to stay in touch with any of you who are interested to, and to think about ways in which what we're doing might be of helpful value to you as well. So really good to keep the conversations going as such. Unfortunately, not on that instance that we were on, but you can also be on that instance. I can go back into it at any time. I will, just for the moment, just while if there's any other questions or thoughts while we're waiting, if there's anyone wants to raise anything, please do.
I guess I'd be interested in hearing more about translation, how that works with languages. That's good.
So translation, literal language translation.
Yes.
Yes, and so there's two things I want to show you there. Let me just pull up this Katikati screen if I can. Okay, so we're in the Katikati screen again, and a few different conversations that have been going on. So one of the first things we did, because we built this, it was first deployed in the COVID response in Somalia in April 2020. And so we're sort of building this on the back of an Africa's Voices project that is using interactive radio to quickly understand how Somalis were experiencing and understanding this new pandemic. And it was fascinating, and really the insights were really valuable because they came quite quickly about a very strong religious frame that was the way that people were interpreting what this pandemic was, and what that meant for the response that would make sense and who they'd trust to hear from, rather than public health authorities, probably religious figures. So we were doing this work, and that's when we first used it. So that was in Somali. And so what we did, and you have it so these standard messages that I'm showing on the right here, the ones that I asked you all in English, that they're configured in the place that's called a message configurator at the moment. And we configured these messages in this little space here. So this is the intro. And as you can see on the right here, we've allowed for a two-language system at the moment. We could do more, but we've been using a two-language system. And here, the organization can manually put in a translation. I can save that configuration. And if that was to be loaded, and it is loaded here, now I have the choice to send this in English or to send this in French. That's just a two-language option that we found very helpful. In a lot of contexts, English and Swahili, a couple of languages is already a good thing and a useful thing. Could be Shewa and English. So that's definitely something that, so for example, I might, I'm not sure, no one new has come in. I don't want to ask them in French, but I can then send that question in French. And I know that actually I can send it to this one. And I've just asked that question in French. Now, that's easy enough. But say the message comes in in French, or the answer that comes in response might be in French. You'll see here, but it isn't activated on this, but we have a translation box here. Now that's a manual translation box. And so the manual translation box means I can type in a translation. Now, what we found that really useful, we had a researcher who was in Cambridge who doesn't speak Somali. So here we have a message that's coming in French in response. And and that says, actually, not for the moment. That's my French translation. But so I've just translated that. And what I've done by doing that is I've put the translation in. So what we found is a researcher in Cambridge trying to understand how were people in a displaced persons camp in Somalia experiencing the lockdown, had a conversation over 3 months. They only spoke English, over 3 months with some displaced people in a camp in Somalia. And it was via a research assistant who was in Kenya. So the research assistant was on the interface. They were doing the communication, and then they were translating the message manually so that the researcher in Cambridge could understand what was being said. And a semi-structured interview occurred over time with 30 people, 30 IDPs, and gave a really rich insight to how the lockdown was being experienced. And that was happening between 3 countries and 2 languages. So it was, in that sense, the interface really supported that. But what we also have built, but are very sort of careful in deploying, is, I mean, this is built on an infrastructure that can bring in, say, Google Translate. And so we can deploy Google Translate resources automatically into that box rather than have a manual translation. And we wouldn't ever recommend that be used as a sort of statement of truth or fact, especially in some languages. But what it does allow quite quickly is for the ability for someone to get a sense of what the conversation is about quite quickly if they don't speak the actual language. So yeah, a bit of a long answer, but something certainly that we're really attentive and interested in as a challenge. Does anyone else want to jump in? I might not be able to see you, so just jump in if you do. Or put a hand up.
I guess maybe one more question. It seemed like one of the questions that came up before was around sort of tracking, being able to sort of track and count and have metrics around interactions, but also in a way that interacts with an existing CRM system. So I think I heard the answer around sort of the being able to sort of track those metrics within the Katikati platform, but I don't know if I heard about sort of if you were able to sort of integrate or export, you know, like metrics around your contacts or anything like that into an existing contact management system or anything like that.
Yeah, that's a great question. And actually, it just came up in a conversation the other day. And I mean, the short answer is yes, because this is built on a data architecture that is primarily interested in the ability to interpret and analyze the underlying data in an efficient and reliable way and access it really quickly. It's not built as a communication infrastructure that happens to have data exhaust that you then have to link in some chaotic way to some other infrastructure. It's quite manageable to link this as exports into another system. There are a couple of things that we're concerned to think about and to do. And that one of them is the fact that we've built this on a de-identification first logic. And that's been quite a strong commitment because of the context and experiences of some we've had in lots of organizations, often doing really good work, often humanitarian to be honest, but not really strong on, I think, data protection and data security. We went through and the ability for different people to access this information, which is often quite sensitive. We went for a de-identification first approach. And that means that we de-identify mobile numbers and IDs at the outset. And that obviously can be then mapped again if necessary with the right authorizations. But I think where an organization wants to explicitly link a conversation to an identifiable person, it's a different organizational reality and environment, and we can adapt to that and build in some of the things that we are concerned to build in. And once that's done, the responsiveness data is easily taken out of this system and put into another either database or into another visualization as well. So yeah, as I said, I think we've done exports from Katikati data, coded Katikati data into a Power BI, for example, visualization, and so that sort of thing, yeah, is doable. But yeah, yeah, sorry.
Oh no, I was just going to say in the context of maybe light touch case management, for example, of the organization that I'm here sort of representing does refugee resettlement, and sort of just checking on informally across the week how things are going, or being responsive to concerns or questions or things like that, but being able to sort of connect it to a particular client, I think would be valuable. Thank you for your response. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and absolutely. And so we've got this interesting case at the moment. So the work we're doing with Shujaz, they have, like, as I said, like thousands of young people every day getting in touch. A couple of volunteers and this Shujaz team member, Monica, managing them, handling these conversations every day. One of the things we do is have an automatic needs reply. So the automatic assumption is that if they're the last person, we use a turn logic. If they were the last person to communicate was them, the automatic assumption is that it needs a reply until it's tagged no reply needed. So that's one way in which you just sort of build a kind of logic of responsiveness into the interface, and they use those filters as well as the visuals to direct them to responsiveness. And then the other one is the escalate. So where there's been escalates, in the Shujaz case, often it's young people asking about sexual reproductive health concerns. And what they're doing is referring them to a third party outside of Shujaz. And so then we build an escalate, a referral tracker in which that's gone out of the Katikati system. It's a communication's gone out, but they can be reminded to come back and check in if everything's okay, and keep cases open as such, even though it's happening outside, and then close them within Katikati. That could be done within Katikati, or as could quite easily be done elsewhere as well.
Thank you.
Been really great questions and comments in the chat as well, which I've been quickly getting on top of, but we're really interested to hear if anyone has experiences of similar things or challenges that we've been thinking are worth solving, but really happy to hear from others as well. Yes, so Rebecca, for Google Translate, absolutely. So we have an integrated Google Translate, and in the past we've deployed it. We're always a bit, conscious of the risks that associate with translating, especially in low resource languages. Obviously, that's getting better all the time, but we have, we can and have integrated Google Translate for the automatic translation. And what that's really especially useful for is visibility sometimes. Sad to say, but visibility sometimes of people who are decision makers in organizations who don't necessarily speak local languages, and that happens a lot in the aid sector. And so their visibility of what's happening in conversations is really helpful for them to get a feel for what's happening in the programmatic environment. And that means that they can log onto the interface themselves, maybe not have access to communicate, but have access to sort of see messages if they're senior enough and see the translations. But yes, the short answer is we have integrated Google Translate, but just we don't automatically do it. Yeah, so where we're at, just to give you a bit of a sense, and I'm not sure how we're doing for time, like, is it in a few minutes that we wrap, or is it a bit longer? I can't remember.
It's till 11:45, or you have that much time if needed.
Cool. I mean, one of the things I just want to give a sense of is, we may as well lay all cards on the table. It's kind of interesting session, and we've been building this, and the main approach has been to learn from deploying in close working relationship with a few organizations rather than trying to just build something and put it out and see who wants to buy it or something. And so working with a few organizations, learning what's useful, but then trying to aim back towards the generically usable product as such that Katikati can be. So we've been working modestly with just a few organizations, and this year I think we want to work with a few more in different contexts, always hopefully learning something different about the application context to bring back into the core. And the other thing we've been really trying to do, and it's not at all easy, is sort of avoid either being, from my own experience, either being heavily reliant on a grant funding environment, which can sometimes, I think, distort the logics of sustainability of an organization, because you have to work out at the end of the day how you're going to keep something going like this. And you can incur a lot of debt, as we would say, in terms of the technical debt, and it's very hard to sort of pay that off. And or you end up burdening other people who are using the platform and get dependent on it, but they can't. And suddenly, you can't keep it going. So I think there's a sort of ethical burden around being sustainable for long enough. So on the one hand, a bit wary of the grant funding in terms of whether that really enables you to seek sustainability or sometimes doesn't, because it distorts that reality. But on the other hand, like really wary of basically, capital that's obsessed with scale and obsessed with innovation that must scale, and thus pushes you into ever standardized, limiting ways of doing really, thoughtful work. And so what we've been sort of just doing is slowly growing this and developing it largely just based on, the modest recovery of costs that we can with the projects we do, and just trying to build incrementally. And I think one thing that's interesting for me in this space is also about what's, I think, increasingly called things like slow tech, and sort of allowing yourself the pace to build things in the right way and at the right time, not obsessing with scale, and allowing it to grow out of just good, thick, deep relationships with limited organizations, and trying to sort of add value that way, and then seeing, over time how you can make that more widely available. And so I just want to put that on the table as a sort of an interesting organizational set of questions and approaches that we're facing and trying to work through. Very welcome, anyone who wants to come in with any thoughts or comments, or yeah.
This is Eliza from the breakout room. I'm just sitting with and thinking about your comment on really having that pressure to scale, but thinking about building the technology in like a very intentional way, and in a slow way, in a very relational way. Yeah, I think, I feel like that's not something, or the narrative that I usually hear in kind of like a tech development space.
Yeah, I think I would second that. I think I feel a lot of concern around sort of tech-based sort of tools and advocacy approaches, but also bringing sort of that capitalist tech-based mindset to work that is often needs to scale more thoughtfully and more responsively to particular environments and particular ways of working, and value driven. And those are so often, in conflict, and, for capitalist funding reasons, scale at any cost often wins over. So hearing someone say scale is important, we all value it because it means we reach more people, but how to do that in a way that's thoughtful and being willing to take the space and the risk to scale thoughtfully is so refreshing. I would love to be able to, hear you and others talk about just that approach to the work in other settings, sort of how to scale thoughtfully versus facing those pressures of scale at any cost right away in order to sort of meet a market demand. So I was going to say that, but then I was like, who cares? But then you said it. So I just want to support that and make sure you hear how valuable that is.
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, I really agree. And I think, there's two scale problems that we've seen. I think one of them is before even the capital, is that one thing we talked about in some work we did previously was about what we call the burden of interpretation. So when we have a close encounter with one person in an interview or a small focus group, we let people speak in their own language, in their own way, freely, and we take the burden of interpreting what it means on ourselves as a researcher, as a qualitative researcher, say. But when we often try to hear from lots of people, we say, we can't take that burden. You have to fit into this ABC set of, multiple choice questions or some, Likert scale, answer, or you have to answer in English, or you deal with this chatbot even if it can't really properly communicate with you. And so we put the burden onto people, and we make them deal with what they want to say and how they want to express themselves, and to structure it into these very constrained, things. And so one of the things that we've been trying to do is say, well, one, that's dehumanizing. So bring human interpretation back in, and bring the burden back as much as possible to us to interpret, but make it easier to do that and to be able to scale that to some extent, not massively scale, not a Google level of scale, but and that's one scale problem. And then the other one, as you said, I think is the capital one. So if you combine this, we need to scale the engagement or the feedback and the programming, and then the capital comes in and says you need to scale it all so that it's achieves some big wins. I think it's really disruptive to the primary mission that often we're seeking. And I think the one thing that capital, if you always remember, is that the West Coast model of this we see is like, let 99 things fail miserably in achieving scale aggressively. If one of them succeeds and gets 1 billion customers, we make our money. It's like, that's a really destructive way to approach engaging with the world, So I think trying to resist that feels like a moral kind of good at the moment.
Especially if an organization decides to jump on ship with one of those, 99 that doesn't, succeed in sort of that scale up, then suddenly you're stuck with this technology that is no longer supported and no longer exists, that you've built your work around. So
yeah.
And one thing I'll add to that as well, and I love this conversation because one of the things that my organization has been working on too is like, oftentimes our sector invests so much energy, months and years, building what we think is really the solution. And this is tied to scaling versus maybe borrowing some practices where it's like, how do you take a more iterative approach and experiment and pilot? And then that way you're not investing all of this energy and effort and capital in something that just might not work. And I'll end by saying that something that we all know, which is, scaling means different things. One, it is how do you go wider, and another is also how you go higher, and another is how you go deeper. So scaling in terms of quality of content that's produced, I think it has to really take precedence over scaling higher and wider.
Yeah, that's really true. I think that we can define scale differently here a bit, and think about how we connect up even horizontally, I think, as well, some of this stuff that often isn't done as well as it could be. But yeah, this is a great discussion. It's really nice to be amongst people who are thinking similarly, and yeah. Sorry not to be there in person. Rebecca, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you again for this presentation. As a group of people who care deeply about elevating the voice of communities that are being served, I'm curious to hear a story that provides fuel in your tank, from the different communities that you're serving. Like, what's one story of individuals that were able to be served that weren't already being served, or people who felt heard? Like, what keeps you going in terms of fuel for this work, and perhaps what story that encourages you to continue forward?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, Arnav's on the line as well, so invite Arnav to jump in if he's got a thought on this as well. I mean, one of the ones that came up when we were at the very beginning, when we were trying to get to pilot this and just test out some ideas. And we did it with an organization that was running a vocational skills training program in Kenya across different centers in the country. And we were trying to, they had a pretty standard M&E function running, etc. And we were trying to see how a more open conversational approach might be helpful in getting insights that they can use more quickly in program adaptation, but also just open a channel that's a bit more open and hopefully trusted. And so we got a bunch of really interesting feedback that was very helpful to the adaptation of the next round of these training TVET courses that they were running. But the channel had sort of gelled, I think, partly because it was just not another form, and it was a channel that was a communication channel, and it was anonymized. And yeah, a woman communicated from one of the training centers to say, look, I'm not speaking, it's not about me. I'm a bit more old, I'm older, and I'm more, I guess, self-assured. But I'm really worried about some of the other younger women in this training center and the relationship with the training manager, who seems to abuse his sort of power and in this and that way. And it was a kind of a long, it was over text message as well, like a long, concerned explanation. So we had to go through a bunch of consent issues. Basically, it was a safeguarding case, but and that was handled very sensitively by the management and the organization, more importantly, that was supporting our pilots, and led to proper, thoughtful investigation and change. And I thought, in a way, it really reminded me that you have to open up a channel of communication. You have to be on the other end and be able to listen attentively and actively listen. And it has to be, as I said, open, that people can communicate what they want to communicate, irrespective of what your purpose was. And they need to trust in that channel. And that's the hardest thing. And the thing that we care about the most here is how hard it is to build trust and how easy it is to destroy it in some of these contexts, because there's no one on the other side, or you get an automated response which is out of touch with what you said, or nothing happens as well. And so for me, it was, again, I think once you open a communication channel and you let people speak about things that they want to speak about, the other thing that goes with that is a huge amount of responsibility. You shouldn't open it unless you're ready to be on the other end of it. So that has always been one of those experiences which is sort of fuel in the tank, both in a good way, which is to say, actually, it can really matter to get this right, but also fuel in the tank in the way of, don't design this stuff or build this stuff if it adds to the problem of the way that sometimes responsibility is deflected by these technologies rather than actually, strengthened. Yeah,
and perhaps just to add a different kind of experience from my end. This is Arnav, also from Katikati, and in one project we've done, also in the region, what we quickly saw is the ways in which this was an open channel for youth to get engaged. And what we saw was, what the organization wanted to do, what was important for them, was an ability to collect demographic data from the youth that they were engaging with, to be able to inform some of their research and some of their programs. But the ways in which they were doing so often resulted in, essentially, it was a kind of automated survey that someone would have to go through when they sent their first message in. And the problem we saw there was that people would send different messages, and sometimes, and fairly often, the first time they were getting in touch with this organization was because they're in some form of crisis, in need of some type of support, because that was a kind of line, and it also included that kind of support. And seeing them get kind of stuck into an automated flow was just quite sad. But it's been really nice to see, as they've moved with kind of Katikati, to see an open dialogue, messages first get assessed for what the person is saying, and the organization, because they care deeply about these issues, really being able to support a number of youth with their crisis, referring them to an organization and following up. And so I think seeing that ability to take it from what who they wanted to be and the type of conversation they wanted to have, but some of the ways they didn't have visibility on what that meant for the youth they were engaging with. Clarifying that as well was nice to see as a change.
Thanks, Rebecca. And yeah, I don't know if anyone else would like to jump in.
I just want to hop in to say I work for Generation USA, coming out of Charlotte, North Carolina in the United States. The conversation that was had today and the work that you guys are doing is very important. The organization that I work with, we are looking to scale so rapidly over the next few years, but what we're seeing is with our program model changing, where we're finding that a lot of people are falling in the gaps. And a lot of people don't feel that they can share their experiences as thoroughly because of certain circumstances. And so we've been really trying to figure out, like, how can we get that one-on-one conversation back? But as you mentioned, like, trust is really hard to build and it is so easy to destroy. And so how can we also implement ways that people can just share with us anonymously what they're going through? And are we also prepared to close that loop on that feedback? And so this is just a really interesting way to see how we can kind of engage in that. And I'm bringing a lot of thoughts back to my team about that. So thank you for this.
Thanks, Bianca. And I mean, please feel free to get in touch with us, because if it's just sharing ideas and thoughts and experiences, or thinking about ways in which you can give this a go and see how it works, it's especially in the sort of global north context, like North America or Europe, just turning this on in a small, limited fashion and maybe communicating with 10 people and seeing how it feels is just really easy to do. So if you were interested, we'd be really happy to support that. One of the things I'm doing right now is in the UK is someone who I worked with years ago in Sudan, and now she's does life coaching, especially in the humanitarian sector, but she lives in Scotland. And she's using Katikati to do some coaching over SMS. She wants to see is it possible to do some coaching over SMS, because she was doing some coaching in Kenya during the pandemic, and the line wasn't strong enough on Skype, so they ended up going to a chat function on Skype without video, and actually it worked really well. So it opened her eyes up to the fact that maybe it's worth, in some context, having a text channel as a mode. And and so she did that, and now we're doing it with a small group of young people. And so I guess keep in touch on that. I just saw the time, we're out of time. It's really great just to be opening up these conversations. I can feel them just opening up as we sit with this, but hopefully we'll continue with them sometime in the future. But thanks so much to Feedback Labs for the opportunity, and wishing you all the very best with your work, and really appreciated the time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Congratulations. Great work.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Bye.